Wow.
Well, everyone, hello. My name is Dan Helms. I'm from New Readers Press, and I'm not going to introduce her, but Jennifer Martin is here. She's going to introduce herself, and she's our editorial director for ESL and is here to share information with you today. So thank you for joining our webinar. Here's Jennifer.
Hello, good afternoon. I have so much I want to share with you, so I might get excited and talk too fast because an hour is so little time. So please, if I'm talking too fast, let us know in the chat or unmute yourself. I don't want to lose anyone. So today we're going to look at 8 great ways to use the news in ESL conversation classes. And because we actually have a special, if you're familiar with News for You, we have a newspaper that's just for English language learners and adult basic ed learners who are emergent readers. So the stories are NRS grade levels 3 to 6 equivalent. And the examples that we're going to work with today will come from that, but you'll see activities you can do with many, many different news articles. So Dan briefly introduced me. I am Jennifer Martin. I'm the editorial director for ESL for New Readers Press. And I've been teaching ESL since about 2002. I was overseas for about 10 years as an immigrant and Spanish language learner. And I actually learned most of my Spanish from reading a free newspaper that was handed out on the subway every day that was about levels 3 to 6 with stories about the same length as this. And by doing all that reading every day, that's the main way I learned Spanish, because with my work schedule, I never had time to take classes. So I can't say enough about free reading. Just getting your students to read, even if they don't do any associated activities, is going to make all the difference in their learning vocabulary and the sentence structure as they get more and more familiar with it. So you want to make sure that you're choosing reading that's at their level, so it's digestible and they are able to pick up the structures and some of the vocabulary. Some new words is fine, but make sure they can understand most of it. Okay, so with that little bit of background, let's keep going. So yeah, the news may not always be good, but it's great for language teaching. And I want to stress, if you take nothing else away from this session, that news articles, using news articles in your class, that's just the starting point. It's not the end. When I did go to Spanish lessons or French lessons in the past, so many times the teachers would just read an article and ask a few comprehension questions, and that was it. I don't know if they didn't trust that we didn't have enough fluency to go into conversation, but that's how you develop it. So give the students some scaffolding and support, but let them speak. That's how they learn. That's how they develop their language. So the stories are just the beginning. They're excellent ways to develop academic skills, critical thinking, academic vocabulary, to make connections between what's happening now in their own lives, their culture, in their home country, what's happening in their lives now, besides the language skills they're developing. So what kinds of things can we do with a news story? As I was mentioning, the story itself is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much, many, many things we can do. Here's a few. You can, well, definitely, please use the pictures. That's such a rich source of vocabulary. Picture's worth 1,000 words, and a picture will also help students learn 1,000 words. Well, maybe more than one picture, but you get the idea. You can use stories to focus on, news articles to focus on language features and structures. And you may think, okay, yes, in the textbook, they have a story, and we want to go through and look at examples of the past simple or the present perfect. Yes, you can do that. But you can also, after you've done the reading, and they've done the comprehension, and maybe you've done some vocabulary exercises, you can go back and have them look for things like proper nouns, which is something that some students may have never thought of or heard about before. Why do you capitalize some things? They may not know that, so take the time to teach that, or you can go back and have them highlight or underline, circle all the numbers and statistics and work on how to say those numbers. And then maybe you can develop a math lesson. So you could look at phrases that show contrast, or phrases that indicate somebody's expressing an opinion. Phrases that show a little bias, such as if somebody says only 39%, maybe it's not biased, but you're seeing that they're having an opinion. They're not just saying 39%. There's a judgment in there, only 39%. So it can be good to kind of raise their focus and their critical thinking after they've understood the article, to go back from time to time and do an activity like that. Pair and small group read alouds. So, and one of the best classes I ever had on ESL teaching was a literacy for English language learners. And one of the things I learned and I incorporated in my teaching after that was whenever we had something, reading it aloud first, while the students follow along reading in print. That way they're hearing and connecting what they're hearing to the words in print. So not asking the students to read aloud first until they've heard you read aloud. Then if you want them to practice, put them in pairs or small groups and have them read through it a second time. If they read it aloud coldly, they're not going to understand what they're reading. There's just too much processing going on. You only have so much processing space in your brain. And if you're focusing on working out sounds, relations to letters, you're not working on the meaning. So definitely read it to them while they're reading along silently before you ask them to read aloud. Okay, class polls. That's a really fun way to get people energized and interested in the topic, and just to add some interactivity. So we'll look at some examples there, but the one that I like to use, and Dan, if you want to post that right now, it's Poll Everywhere. I used to use Google Forms, but Poll Everywhere has so many different varieties and fewer limits, and it's free forever. You can pay for an account, but I've never had to, and I've used it a lot. So I don't know what you get for paying, but you get a lot for free. If you're teaching in projects, you can really, really see your intermediate and higher level students grow with those kinds of activities. And we'll look at some examples. Summarizing, especially summarizing, is important for academic English, for test taking, but for everything. If something interesting happened to you, you read something interesting, you saw a movie, you need to be able to summarize it, right? Explain it briefly before you lose people's attention. So a little twist you can do on that is newscasting. And there's also an activity that I like from, I think it's Teach Thought was the website, that gives some step-by-step guide for how you can do a newscasting class. And something really fun you can do if you meet with your students often. I used to have a Friday integrated skills for students, class for students who had classes full-time 5 days a week. So on Fridays, we would have a different set of students assigned to come in and do the news. And one guy always did the weather report, and another guy always did the sports report. So you could set up something little like that, where you assign maybe 3 students to read a story each week and come in and report it. So summarizing, but newscasting. Think, pair, share. If you don't know it, it's a no prep activity that gets, basically, if you know about wait time, you have students who are always, probably in your classes, always wanting to talk, always want to share their opinion, and others who might be a little quieter, right? So if you use the think, pair, share, you give them the time to think first. Just say, we're going to have about 2 minutes of quiet time. I'm going to give you a question. I want you to think about it. And when I call time, then you turn and talk to the person next to you about it. They can make notes and writing. So sometimes it's also called write, pair, share. The idea is that they have some time to process their thoughts about whatever you've asked them or whatever you've read, because they might need to translate it, to put the words in order. Give them time before they're asked to speak. So something you can do with any article, any activity. And debate and dialogue. Nowadays, people are saying not debate, dialogue, right? Because dialogue is more open-minded. You're listening to the other side and considering the other side. Whereas debate, you're arguing one side and the other person argues their side and you're trying to win. So dialogue is more listening, openly trying to find compromise, but you're at least listening. Identifying fact versus opinion, always useful. Culture sharing, anytime you can, connect whatever you're reading, whatever you're talking about, back to your students' home cultures. That allows them to learn from each other and you to learn from them. And you probably all know this, but probably preaching to the choir. But that's guaranteed to make your classes more enjoyable for your students when their voices are part of the community and they feel valued. Ranking is another fun activity that doesn't really require much prep at all. So you just have to kind of, when you're thinking about a topic, think about where a ranking would fit. So we'll look at some examples. And web quests. I'm a huge fan of web quests with intermediate and above because it gets students really engaged. They're doing authentic reading. They're developing digital skills. And then when they report back on what they found, they're teaching their peers. So they're developing voice of authority, they're using real language, they're excited to share what they've learned, and they're developing skills that will be useful to them in academics and in the workplace. So that said, there are so many more things you can do. And there are even more ideas on this side, this link here that Dan can post, newsforyouonline.com, teachers. And even if you're not subscribed yet, you can access this. So have a look and then you'll get some good ideas here. I do see Q&A question. I didn't really give you, let me check. Can you tell us more about ranking? Yes, I will be telling you about ranking. Dan, anything in the chat that I should address now before I go on?
I've been keeping up with it.
Okay, thank you. All right, just because that's so much. All right, so let's go ahead and look at some examples. And I hope you can see my full screen because I have a bunch of black boxes up for me. So this is a story, a serious story. We're kind of going to alternate today between more serious and lighter stories. Trust in the police has dropped based on a poll of Americans. I bet your students will have might have something to say about this if they feel safe. For this, you're going to probably want to start with the pictures before you jump into the article and work on pre-teaching some vocabulary so they have a better chance of understanding what they're reading. So looking at the first picture, what words there would you think you might be new to your students? And you may post in the chat or unmute yourself.
They will have to post in the chat. No one.
Okay.
Has,
Oh, they're muted. Okay.
The ability to.
Okay. Charge, absolutely. Justice, yeah. Tire, yes. I'm so glad you said that. They aren't going to know what the heck that is. Unless they're British English speakers, they might think it means a thing you put on your car, but no, proper nouns. So make sure that they know that. That's going to confuse them, that that's actually a person. And charge, somebody mentioned that. Yeah, they might know charge related to money, but they probably don't know it in this context. What is this context? Where are they? And that's right, you can't speak. Yeah, dropped, very good. Yep, newscast. So they're in a courtroom. So you could talk about courtroom, judges, right? Or is it a city council meeting? But looks like a courtroom. And here, oh, city council meeting. Okay. Here, what do you see happening? And you probably can't read this caption there, but the students would be able to. It says demonstrators protest. So you've got some words there. You could draw their attention to that, people protesting, or you might use the word march. So pre-teaching those words. And then Yeah, based on the title, you're going to probably want to teach them whole. You could have them, it's the courtroom, city council, charge, criminal charges, cops, police, justice, protest. What are some other words you might see in a story about trust in the police dropping? And I don't know if you can see me, but use your body language to show drop, or draw the downward arrow on the board. So how can you show, or what are some other words that might come up in that context? So go ahead and make a list or a mind map on the board with your students and have them copy that down in their notebooks. Then, when you actually start reading the story and listening, have them go ahead and tick off the words in the story that they had on their list that you predicted might be in the story, just to confirm it's a second view of the word. You might have read that you need between 7 and 11 contacts with the word for it to enter your vocabulary, even in just a passive sense, to really have it be your own. So each time that they see and encounter a word, it's strengthening that, the building, they say neurons that fire together wire together. The more times you establish that pathway and build it, the more connections, the more they're going to remember it. So that activity helps. If they're ticking them off, we just talked about them, now I see them in the article. Yeah, I saw that, I heard that. Then you can go on and do comprehension questions or summarizing. And after you've done those activities, News for You has those kinds of activities for all of the readings that come with the weekly teacher's guide. So after that, then you can have the students, if you want to work on their fluency, have them read aloud in pairs or small groups while you walk around and support them. If they have questions or you hear them struggling with the word, help them with how to say it, make a note of it. And then later when you regroup, practice that word with the whole class, because if one student struggled, probably the others would too. And reinforcing it with everybody pronouncing it is helpful. So small group discussions and then whole class feedback and sharing. So I've got some discussion questions. There's actually a handout, and then I have just a preview with some of the questions on the next slide. Let me do that, and then we'll come back here. So for class discussions, a whole class discussion, you might want to start with essential questions, big questions. And things like what are some reasons people might call the police, to get everybody on the same track? What are some reasons people call the police? And is it important that people trust in the police? Why? Why is that important? It might seem obvious, but when they're learning English or any language, right? To be able to express those reasons. Why do people need to trust in the police? They'll have to think about it. They'll have to find the words to express those ideas. So they're developing skills that way. Why have some people lost trust in the police? And have you? And then always have some kind of connection to self. And so everybody has a chance to speak, especially if you have larger classes. Put them in small groups or pairs. So there's actually in the handout, you'll see there's a lot more questions in both these sections. So one thing that I like to do is give students more than enough questions so they can ask the questions that are only interesting to them. So if there's a question, I don't really care about that, go on, there's going to be another one that's interesting to you. So these are help them connect to themselves. And here's a cultural question. What are the police like in your country? And some other words and vocabulary might come up here. Just a language note here, if you're doing a whole article on the police, it's a good moment if you do this one to teach that police in English, police have, police are. It takes a plural, it's an uncountable noun or a mass count noun, whether you know that word or not, it takes a plural verb. In most languages, it doesn't. So in most Latin languages, they'll say police is, police has. So if you hear that mistake, it's not just them dropping yes, it's grammatically different in their own language. So take the moment to highlight that. Okay. Back to this slide, because something else you could do with this article. It mentions a lot. It's a poll. There are going to be a lot of numbers in the article. So some of the statistics and trends that it talks about, you could focus on that language. About 66%. What does about mean? You can gesture hands, they'll probably get that. Is it exactly 66%? Is it more? Is it less? Could it be more or less? Only 39%. What's the difference between saying 39% and only 39%? Just 12%. What does just mean here? Does it mean fair? Also talking about trends, increased and dropped. You could draw the up and down arrows on your board, hoping you have whiteboard, or use your body gestures and ask for synonyms, because all the time in news stories and in sports stories, you get that metaphorical language: fall, drop, crash, right? Decreased, climb, anything going up will be equivalent to increased, anything going down is equivalent to decreased. So go ahead and put some equivalents on the board for them. Ratios and other language for talking about numbers, less than half. Speaking of half, a third and a quarter. Apparently, there was a story this week about how McDonald's tried to introduce a third-pound hamburger in the United States, and it was not successful because many customers thought that a third pound was smaller than a quarter pounder, and they couldn't understand why McDonald's would charge more for a third pound than for a quarter pound. Anyway, so it might be worth teaching some ratios and statistics and fractions with your students. So there is, actually, Dan, I don't remember if I put it on the list to share in the chat. If you're familiar with EdNet, there's a lot of lesson resources there. It's on the Pro Literacy website. There's a nice lesson on ratios and percentages that you could combine well with this article, for example. So I wouldn't do this initially. I do the discussion first because it's such a weighty topic. Students are going to want to talk first. Then you could go back and work on statistics and math if you want to. Oh, and, well, class poll of their own opinions so they can figure out the calculations and percentages in a context. Keep it still interesting, right? So if they're going back and looking at the article, they've already seen it. Get some new data for them. Do a class poll and find out 25% of our class, or 5 out of our 20 students believe, right? Okay, so am I going too fast? When you do small group discussions, it helps, I mentioned before, to give plenty of questions so they can choose the ones that most interest them. And I also, especially with bigger classes and larger groups, I like to divide the discussion questions into sets. Parts A, B, C, D, so that each group member is responsible for leading the discussion on different questions. That makes sure that everyone has to listen, because they all have different questions. You can, cut the pages up. They all have different questions, and everybody has to participate. And as much as you can, try to put them in mixed language groups, at least one person who speaks a different language in each group. So they have to kind of try to stay in English as best as they can. And provide them sentence stems. A lot of times they might not know how to get a thought out, how to express themselves. So if you can give them a handout on a piece of paper, if you're lucky and you actually have your own classroom that you get to stay in, you can put these on a word wall. That was the nice thing about teaching K-12. You could put stuff up on your wall and have a word wall, and students get used to it being there, and they can just turn and look at it, and you see them doing it, so you know it's working. Another thing that you can do, if you have at least a classroom that's dedicated to ESL. If you're working on discussions, is print this out on a little piece of paper and tape it, or tape the expressions you want them to use to their desks. That way it doesn't get lost in the shuffle of other papers they might have, and they know it's there and they can always look at it every time they go to do a discussion. Very handy. And with especially more complex group projects and longer discussions, you can assign roles to make sure everybody's participating. So you could get maybe the quieter person to be a researcher. If somebody has a question, they Google it for them, how to say a word, what the name of the person who was shot in your town was. Somebody could be the timekeeper who keeps everybody on track and knows when you're getting, oh, we spent too long on this, time to move on. Or participation tracker, someone who keeps track of everybody, everybody's taking part. And someone who's taking notes, so when you go back and you share with the group, they have something to share, right? They remember what they talked about. So just some suggestions to set up your small group discussions and make them more successful, getting everybody talking. Okay, oh, now, as I promised, for a lighter story. This one, New Mexico may soon have a spicy state smell. Very light topic, right? Short article too, be appropriate for an intermediate level. In addition to spicy and smell, this story is actually mainly about state symbols, right? A state smell is not silly. You know, you've heard of state flower, state bird, state rock, state smell, but it makes for one lesson. So as a warmer, before you even share the article with them, you could, if you're doing online, you could post it in the chat. If you're in person, I'd like to start with a warmer on the board. So as the students who are coming in 10 minutes late or 5 minutes late, they can see what everybody else is doing and get right to it, right? And then you can go to the actual article when everybody has arrived, if you have habitual late arrivers, right? So have them come in and get them in the habit of this, something on the board, and they turn and talk to the person next to them or in groups on that activity. And it's something that's interesting and stimulating enough that they'll get right to it. So what does your home smell like in the morning, in the afternoon, at dinner time? What are some of your favorite smells? Why are those your favorite smells? They might say something, they like the smell of grass because they like it. Well, why? What do you associate it with anything? So try to draw those things out, or maybe something reminds them. Usually smell has a very strong association with memory. Great BBC Learning English article on that, but it's British English. So after you've talked about smells a little bit, something that you could do when you go on and do the reading, there's discussion questions again in the teacher guide for this unit or this story. Have them also find New Mexico. It never hurts to teach them about US geography, right? Find it on the map, talk about the climate there, where it's at in the country. What do you think the weather is like there? Do you think it snows there? And anybody from New Mexico here? It actually does in the mountains, but so geography, you could tell them what's it like there, what's the landscape like, maybe. Culture, what's the cultural background in New Mexico? Like why would spicy chilies be a part of why would that be their state smell? You know, is that typical? It wouldn't be here in New England. So you can talk and get them more acquainted with the US, the culture, different cultures, subcultures, and geography, and the different influences of groups, different areas. Okay, so you read the article. Article talks about state symbols, which they may have never heard of because it's kind of a silly thing. So you could go to your state's website or do a Google search on state symbols and they'll come up. Find out what your own state symbols are. And some of them are really silly. Besides the usual state songs, there's state questions. There are all kinds of silly ones. So it can make for a kind of fun lesson. What is the purpose of state symbols? Well, if you don't know, look it up and find out. What would be the symbols of your town? So this is where I would have the class come up with this. Think about their town. What would be the town's bird? What would be the town's song or the town's logo? What would be the town's rock or the town tree or the town flower? So you can imagine that could be a kind of a fun group activity, community building activity. In the article, they also talk about how the students of this class that New Mexico congressman visited said, why isn't there a state smell? And they proposed that, and the congressman said, hey, yes, I think that's a great idea. Why don't you write a proposal? So I think they were grade school students. They did, and then they got to go to the New Mexico state legislature and present their idea, and the New Mexico House voted on it. At the time of the article, the House had approved it, but it wasn't law yet. So you could use that language and that example to talk about how laws are passed, and also the government, how there's the federal government with 2 houses, and the state governments sometimes have 2 houses too. So you could talk about the words in the article and then explain the concepts. So these, for example, these here you see on screen are words that were in the article. All right, now, alternatively, say you've already had lessons on passing new state laws or Congress and things like that. Maybe you've already done that. Maybe you just want to do something more related to smell. I mentioned the BBC Learning English article, so this isn't original here. Connotations, especially anybody in a higher intermediate level, that's something that is on your objectives for NRS, ELP, something you got to learn. So the connotations of words. So go ahead and make a chart or give them a graphic organizer of vocabulary related to smell that has positive and negative connotations. And then you might also want to leave a space for typical words they typically modify. So for example, words like scent. Does scent have a positive connotation? Does it feel more positive? Positive, nice things, or bad smells? Odor. Do we usually use odor to talk about things like roses or things like socks and feet? Fragrance, right? Does fragrance describe, sometimes we use it sarcastically, but you don't usually talk about the fragrance of someone's dirty socks, right? So doing that connotation check there. And the difference also, word building, I forgot to say that. So stink versus stinky, fragrant versus fragrance. I don't think we usually say odorous, but smell, smelly, smelly cat, perfume, and words that often come up in that context. So disgusting, it smells like, that smell reminds me of. So, and then you could give them some nouns to match with the different fragrance words, collocations. Okay, let me continue. So let's just do a little interactive activity here. So you can see one of the more unique things you can do with Poll Everywhere. You can create a social word cloud generator. So you can, in the chat, Dan, can you post the link? If you type in pollev.com, don't worry about caps, it can be all lowercase, pollev.com/jmartin234. It will take you to our class or our group word cloud. And I'm going to go to that page. And
Is this on the spreadsheet you sent me?
yeah.
I'm trying to find it. I see polleverywhere.com.
Nope, further down it should be I lost the slide number.
Oh, I see it.
Okay, otherwise I'll type it here. pollev.com jmartin234. So if you go there, it will get you in and just type in. Oh, here we go. We got our first word. I see barbecue. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we haven't barbecued yet, but my neighbors are always roasting meat. It's fantastic.
Now, are you seeing words appear live?
Yeah, can you guys see it?
No, you're not sharing that screen.
Oh, okay. Let me stop and reshare. I thought I was sharing my whole screen. All right. They worked on WebEx. Let me stop and reshare. Can we see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Rain, yeah. Sunscreen, oh yeah. Outside. I bet somebody said cut grass. Dirt, oh, yeah, that's a good smell. Fertilizer. Mm-hmm. Now, do you mean natural fertilizer, manure, or artificial fertilizer? Lilacs. The desert or desert? Yeah, fresh. How about one of my favorite smells is tomato plants. Love that smell. Honeysuckle. Yeah. Cool. It's interesting that the most commonly mentioned word is rain. That's why it's bigger. Mown, fresh mown grass, probably. Yeah. Well, chlorine. Yeah. Watermelon. Lovely. I'm so excited. It's summer. Salty. Mint. Yeah. Like ice cream. Hey. Oh, yeah. Awesome. Sweat. Okay, great. All right, I'll try to maybe we can send this out afterwards. Sand, yeah, the beach, beer. Oh, yeah, this is great. So can you see how you could incorporate this? This could be fun with your classes. Beer, I like how that one got bigger. So it's a common one. Salt, sunscreen, yeah. Sound the smells of summer. All right, let's go back. I hate to cut it off, but time is limited. Okay, so
Now we still see the
thank
word
you.
map. I don't know what's happening there.
I don't know. When I share screen, it's supposed to go with me, but it doesn't. Okay, I'm going to go back to slideshow so we can see fully. Okay, so lastly, an extension, connection to self, personal meaningful vocabulary. You could have them do a project creating a poster, either on paper or a digital poster on maybe a slide, or if you want to teach them Canva, it's really easy to use. It has templates, but they could do it paper too. Their own family symbols. So they could get their families involved in the project. What is their family flower? Do they have a family song? Is there a family color, a family motto? Family question, family smell, family bird, family stone, whatever, have fun with it. I think my family song would have been Rockin' Robin. This is something we used to sing in the song on the way to Grandma's house. So think about that, different things that you could do. Or depending on your group, or maybe you're teaching one-to-one, you could do this one-to-one too, but they could list their favorite smells and write about why they're their favorite smells. Again, it's really good for bringing up memories and really personal things that they don't usually get to talk about in English. So for something like that, I would say it's okay if they want to write in their native language first, because they're going to be delving deep and they might not have the vocabulary. But then, so that they can share it, they should translate it to English. And there are an infinite number of tools to do that now. They can look it up word by word, try to do it in English by themselves, but they can also use AI, right? Or they can use Google Translate. But the key idea is that they're getting vocabulary that is personally meaningful to them, because that might not come up in class. All right, sorry. Moving on, transition, back to the serious stuff. Natural disasters and making plans for natural disasters. Unfortunately, they're always in the news, and even more unfortunately, they're probably going to become increasingly so, right? We always have good news too, and news for you, but there are some of these, right? So there were stories right after the earthquake in Turkey.
Jennifer?
Yeah,
I'm not sure why, but we're still
uh,
on the slide number 10.
really?
Yes.
Huh, okay. All righty. Huh. I wonder why. So you still see slide 10?
There's 12.
Okay, maybe I can't share the whole screen. I can't make it large screen. Oh, okay. If this is okay with you guys, I'm sorry I can't make it full screen. Can everybody see it though?
We can now. We see 12.
Okay, maybe there's a lag. All right, so yeah, this particular one will have a lot of academic language. Actually, any natural disaster type news story. And if you're in a community college setting by chance, or you're preparing students for workplace, or preparing them to study, they'll need to learn those academic word list words. And these kinds of articles are full of them. So, you might have the phrasal verbs like fall down, but you'll also get things like damage. And you see that here in the subtitle, damage. You'll get words like were caused, passive voice, and tectonic plates, the plates sliding past each other. Collapse, the building collapsed. You might get rubble. But because of the pictures and because it's news, big news that everybody will know about, I'm speaking from personal experience, your students will understand things that in the context that they might not otherwise understand. And the more times they see the words, the more time they'll develop them in their vocabulary. So maybe the first time they don't need to learn the word rubble, but if it is in the article and from the picture, and maybe you use it, it becomes familiar to them. And after a few times, they'll know the word. So these are really good for teaching that way. Anyway, in your area, you might not have earthquakes, but you surely have some kind of natural disasters. So I have a project for you here. I did want to give you a little warning here, though. If you do something like this, you might want to preview it if you have students from that region. If you had students from Turkey, they might not want to go there in class with their friends around them, right? It might be too personal, too upsetting. So you might mention it before you do the lesson and make sure they're okay with it. And be careful if they're doing pair work, if traumatic things come up. And the same thing is true. This happened with Puerto Rican students and Haitian students. So Puerto Rico was a hurricane, Haiti, the earthquake. But depending on how much time and distance, and so mention it to them and ask. So probably start with the pictures, describing the pictures, reading the captions, and brainstorming vocabulary, again, that might appear in the article. And with a little twist on that, you could do it as a small group competition. Put the students in maybe 4 or 5 groups, have them brainstorm as many words related to earthquakes or hurricanes or whatever as they can. And then feedback together on the board. You have one group, first group gives their words, you write them down. Second group reads their words, and if some of them are the same, you just cross them out or tick them off. And then in the end, the group with the most unique words wins. So it gives them points for being unique and coming up with more words, not the same as everybody else. So just a unique twist, and it only takes a few minutes. Post reading, pair or small group discussions about their own experiences. Oh. Okay, I thought I had some examples, but I don't. Okay, so some ways that you could use that. What I do have is an extension peer teaching activity. So if in your area you have floods or tornadoes or hurricanes, you could do this activity about those topics. Maybe you have blizzards or droughts, or you have, unfortunately, you've had a recent attack, mass shooting. You could talk about that, extreme heat. So on this website, ready.gov, they have actually texts that are appropriate for different levels, but this one, usually some of the text is appropriate for an upper intermediate level, but as you can see, there are parts that are appropriate for even low, very low levels. So there's something for everyone here. Drop, cover, hold on, the pictures show what that means, right? So, and this is information that your students will, I think you will agree with me, find useful and helpful. They may be coming from a place where they've never experienced tornadoes, for example, so they need to know these things. And if they hear the weather, so they understand the difference between a tornado watch and a tornado warning. And what does that siren mean anyway, right? So teach them those things. Great website. And what you could do is maybe you have several disasters in your area, give each group a different one to research, take notes, prepare ideas, make a poster, or a mini 3-slide presentation, maybe 5 slides the group does, and they share it with the class. If you're a teacher and you have a Google Education account, if you have an education email, you can get a free Google account and use Google Slides with your students. So that can be a great way to do it. My students always loved Prezi, or they just thought it was more exciting. I didn't really know how to use it, but they did. So the groups can then present it and talk about what they learned. And individual students could also alternatively make a plan for their family. So where will the family go? Who will they call? How will they communicate if they're separated when the event happens? So that could be a writing assignment, right? Okay, so something you could do with that article beyond the article. This is a fun one, I think. Gender roles and housework. Culture and cultural change. So this is a nice story from the archives about men going to housework school. And this is from an excerpt from the story. For years, people in Japan have followed strict rules about what men and women should do. Most older men in Japan have never done housework. They don't know how to cook. They don't know how to wash dishes. Their wives do all household jobs. Household is a word that comes up all the time on taxes and forms. Teach that. It's all the people who live together in a house. So their wives do all household jobs, but things are starting to change a little. And you can imagine where the story goes from there. But you could start with this and have the students guess. What do you think the story is going to say? Right? And talk about the man, about how old is he? Why might he be taking this class? Do you think his wife just said enough is enough? Or why? Why would he be taking this class? And what kinds of skills do you think he's learning? Picture gives you some hints, right? You could also ask them, what about in your culture? And actually, we're coming to that. So you could have them, the reading doesn't go into a lot of vocabulary for household tasks, but as you know, that's something that is fun to do with students. They often don't know these, they do come up on tests. So you can have them, you can elicit and teach vocabulary for household tasks with images or gestures. That's really good for gesturing too. But here's some fun images from an also interesting story from NPR. There's audio and a text article with some lists and tips for dividing household tasks with roommates, whether it be your spouse or roommate. So some of your students might be in that situation. Maybe they're not married, but they're living with lots of roommates. So that could be interesting to them. But whether you use the article or not, the pictures are fun. Or examples of different housework. What do you see that needs to be done in this picture, right? You've got some laundry over here. You got kids' toys on the floor. You got groceries that need to be put away. So you've got some different vocabulary there. She's cooking and holding the baby in one arm, right? More toys on the floor. Kids trying to eat. There's dirty dishes in the sink. So lots of good vocabulary there. And also in this nice little picture, chores, right? That's a good word to learn. Chores and errands outside of the house. Duties, the things you have to do, miscellaneous, not specific, right? Extras. So after eliciting, teaching the vocabulary, you could have them label a picture. You could make flashcards or a word wall, and then later use the flashcards you've made, hem them out, and have students do charades. Now, ranking something somebody asked about before. Poll Everywhere, the one we used to do the word cloud, has a ranking kind of activity you can do. You just set up, okay. Watch a tutorial for that because I'm not going to have time to show you how to create one. I'd love to, but it's really easy. You just choose, I want to do a ranking, and then you put the items in. So what's the worst household chore? Maybe it's ironing, maybe it's folding clothes. So you list maybe 10 chores and then set it as a ranking activity, share it a link with your students, and they can go in and rank. They slide tasks around and put them in order from worst to least. And then you can look and discuss the findings of that together. So further extension or discussion activity, right? Talking about the students' home countries. What is the typical household division of labor in their countries? In their country, what are the traditional men's tasks versus what are the traditional women's tasks? Because they're not the same everywhere, right? And you could have them talk about, what did this look like? In their families when they were growing up. Is this changing in their generation? Do they think it should? Are they in a house with men and women now? And if so, who does what? If they have children, are they trying to teach them differently? And then, yep, you could do that class survey. And then with that, you'll have real data so students can explore and analyze. If you just want to have a look at that, how the survey works, I actually have a survey set up. I'm just not going to have time to show you. It'll be at the same address that we used before. So fullev.com/jmartin234. So you could do that. And then if we have your email addresses, we can share the results if you're curious. But you can at least see what the survey looks like then. Let me keep going. Okay, so here's a different story again. If you wanted to do debate or dialogue on reintroduction of wild animals, you can imagine this is one that probably has two sides to the story or two different opinions. So at least, right? So bringing back wild jaguars. I don't know if you know them. They're the most ferocious of the big cats. And they used to be common throughout the southern, Florida, at least Florida, I think Texas, and also New Mexico and Arizona. So I think right now, if I remember from the article, there is only one, and he's in Arizona right now. But they'd like to reintroduce them because they were originally common. Well, not common, but they lived in larger populations. So you could have a little discussion with two columns discussing the pros and cons of reintroducing predators. Things like wolves, right? Snakes. They recently reintroduced a native rattlesnake to a reservoir near where I live, and that was very controversial. So who would support the introduction of predators and why? And who would oppose this, or who might oppose it and why? So then you could talk about the possible impacts on the ecosystems and people. Before you do that, though, I suggest make a list of wild animals in your area, because they might not know all the words and they probably have seen some of them. And some of them are hard to say, like squirrel is notoriously difficult to pronounce. Squirrel. So you can make some pictures and a little slideshow, or have pictures that you hold up for the class if you don't have tech where you're at. You can list it and write on board, hoping you have a board, the wild animals in your students' home countries, because they're probably very different, and give them a chance to share. And then after you've got some of that vocabulary, have them turn and talk to one another and tell a story about a funny or scary experience with a wild animal. Probably everybody has one of those. And you might also take the opportunity, if you're talking about this, to make sure they know about rabies and ticks, right? I think ticks are now, Lyme disease carrying ticks have spread throughout the world, but that's new. Lyme disease was not a thing throughout the world until the last few years. So make sure they're aware of that. Okay, we are running out of time, but another really fun thing to do with that story is another poll, which you can go into a poll application and do, or you can just do it on a slide or on your screen or hold up pictures. What's more dangerous, a deer or a mountain lion, shark or a dog? Anybody know? Oh, so Christine, I'm looking in the chat. I will share the link with you.
I'm answering that, Jennifer.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure you have to have a subscription,
Okay.
but I'm letting them know how they could
Okay.
try it for
Yeah.
free.
Okay. All right. So, okay, I've seen some people have answered this, so this is always fun. And you can think, why would she ask this question? Isn't that obvious? Well, here's the big reveal. So it's fun, right? The most dangerous animal in the United States is the deer. And I bet you can guess why. So I wish I could hear your answers, but cars, right? Car accidents. More people are killed in car accidents with deer than from any of these other animals. So is it really the deer's fault? I don't know. There is Lyme disease also, but it's not as deadly, right? As the accidents. Hornets, bees, and wasps. They're little things, but a lot of people are allergic. So they're pretty dangerous. Number 2 in the United States. Dogs, more dangerous than cougars, more dangerous than bears. And cows, livestock, well, cows and horses kill more people than all these other guys. One kick, it's actually very dangerous. Dangerous spiders, I'm very surprised to find this up here so high, so I would want to investigate this more, but I guess you can also think about frequency of contact with these things. We probably have a lot more contact with deer and bees and dogs and cows than we do. Well, spiders we have a lot of contact with, but we hardly ever see sharks, right? So, but yeah, sharks not as deadly because we probably have fewer interactions, and the same with cougars. So if you do this on the world scale, you will find out that the mosquito is the deadliest animal by far, followed by humans. And then after that, look at that, 725,000 dead, snake, 50,000. And a curious thing to me here is, where is it? Oh, the snail, freshwater snail. Who would think? Snails are more dangerous than sharks. And again, it's number of interactions, how common they are. And this little bug, I would never think he was deadly, but he causes Chagas disease in Central America and South America. It kills a lot of people. So, all right. I'm going to skip by this one, but it's in the PowerPoint, the slides that you'll have access to. Another ranking activity about inventions. And students can play, okay, quickly, can do a little game where they research some weird inventions and then they make up some of their own, and they make the groups make a little quiz for the other students in the class. So the other students have to guess which of the inventions are real and which ones are fake, right? And another project I've done with students that works nicely is to have them do a little research on the invention of everyday objects. Maybe bread, who invented bread, or coffee, toothbrushes, toilet paper, bottled water, playing cards. And one of my students, for some reason, did lead banks. Personal interest, I guess, but it's good for getting them talking, even if they don't want to stand at the front of the room, even in their small groups, and sharing what they learn. You could also have them do an infographic. Okay, camping in New York City, another really fun article. Who would have known you can camp in New York City parks? That's a way to have a budget vacation in New York. I don't know if you can have campfires though. But so that could be a fun story to read. And then you could do a project imagining first imagining the pros and cons of camping in New York City or any big city. Would you like to try it? Why or why not? Can you imagine? Might be kind of noisy. And then, okay, so you could pre-teach vocabulary. You could talk about their own experiences with camping. A lot of students have really nice stories about this, especially students from the Middle East. And you could plan a class, have the class do a project, doing a camping guide for your area. They can decide who they want to plan a camping trip for. A family, a couple, a group of friends for a week or a weekend, and give them a budget. Do they want to go cheap, mid-range, or luxury, but assign them a specific dollar amount, and then you can incorporate some financial literacy to it. They have a specific amount of money to spend, and they have to make sure they stay within that budget. So they're doing some digital skills. You can give them links to your state park system or campsites in the area. And they can prepare the guidebook with best campsites and fees, points of interest, how to get there, maps and leaps, best time to go, tips and warnings, what to pack, equipment. And believe it or not, I did an activity like this with a high beginner class, and they did so fantastic. They did so well with it. It was at the end, the very end of the course, but I wouldn't have expected that they could produce what they were able to produce at the end of it. So you'd be surprised to give them a chance. Okay, that's all we have time for. This is actually an activity that you can find on the News for You website, summarizing. So find this on the teacher tips page and you can read more about it, or it's in a PDF. And you can always access, there's a free issue on the website, and this story is there. And it's one of those that makes you feel good because you are English language teachers. It's a story on an Afghani immigrant. So anybody who's teaching Afghani refugees, immigrants right now, you might want to check this out. He came here when he was 2, and in 2nd grade, he had a very special teacher who spent a lot of time with him and really helped him. And he is now a famous writer, very successful writer. He writes and publishes in the New Yorker, which if you know anything, that means you're really good. So he's published actually a great book, but I discovered him from News for You. And there's a really nice interview with him on NPR you could listen to with higher level students, probably high intermediate. And he has a website where there's a link to one of his stories that's really funny. He's got a sense of humor in all of them. So look up Sky Jamil Jan Kochoy. The story's on the free version of the News for You website. So you can find it there or in the link in the PDF that I'll send. So check it out and read one of his stories, the article in the New Yorker, the story he wrote there. It's fantastic and very funny.
Well, Jennifer, we've got a lot of folks thanking you for the ideas and for your time today. We are out of time, so
yes.
we'll wrap this up by my reminding you that you'll get all of the slides you saw, plus the rest, and the handouts and everything else in a follow-up email sometime next week. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today.